evening, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Unfinished Business. Tonight, I have a special guest with me. But before I begin, please subscribe to watch our weekly show on YouTube at Rogette Harris, Rogette 1980 on Instagram, Rogette Harris on Twitter, or Unfinished Business with Rogette Harris on Facebook. You can also send a comment, show idea, or just say hi to rogetteharris@gmail.com. Today, we celebrate the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one of America's most revered civil rights leaders. One of his favorite quotes of mine is, "The time is always right to do what is right." This year's theme, Building a Just Society with Equal Opportunity, is the focus of today, which marks what would have been Dr. King's 92nd birthday. As we continue Dr. King's unfinished work, it is difficult to imagine a more important conversation right now than where do we go from here as a society? Recent events have provided even more evidence that we have really not made much progress since Dr. King pushed us to face and address the triple evils of racism, poverty, and belligerence. So let's get busy and solve some unfinished business. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. With us, we have a very special guest, State Representative Donna Bullock, who was just elected chair of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus. So how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for joining us. So tell our viewers about your new role and the mission of the Black Caucus, please.
Great. Thank you. I'm truly honored to be elected by my peers here in the Pennsylvania House and Senate to serve as the chair of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus. The Black Caucus was formed in 1973 by our then leader, K. Leroy Ervin, and 11 other members who identified as Black members here in the Pennsylvania House and Senate. One, and first and foremost, to be a voice for Black communities across the Commonwealth, but to also give Black legislators an opportunity to work together, to speak comfortably about the issues that are important to them in their community, and to empower them to be effective legislators. Now we are here in 2020, and that work is so much just as important as it was then as it is today. And so I look forward to working in that role. I look forward to advancing the issues of Black Pennsylvanians from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, from Erie to Scranton, because it's important. And I know that there are communities of color, Black and brown folks all across the state who care about issues that happen right here in Harrisburg, issues that we vote on, legislation that we draft, and legislation that impacts their lives. And so it's important that we inform that legislation by the communities that it impacts, and I'm honored to serve in that role.
You brought up other cities throughout Pennsylvania, and I myself am here in Rockland County, which houses the capital city. A lot of times, people view Pennsylvania as Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and they forget that there's a large racial minority population in the middle of the state, not just the city of Harrisburg, you have the cities of Carlisle, the city of York, and whatnot. But a lot of times we're kind of left out of the agenda. How do you plan on including all of us, being more inclusive to ensure that all racial minorities are included in your agenda moving forward?
Right. So first and foremost, we had elected a group of diverse legislators to serve on the executive board of the Black Caucus. Yes, I am from Philadelphia. The vice chair, Rep. Summer Lee, is from Pittsburgh. Our secretary, Rep. Carol Hill Evans, is from York, and our treasurer is a young Dominican brother from Berks County in Reading, Manuel Guzman. So we're excited to have this diversity in just the leadership, and with that, we will begin to have more conversations across the Commonwealth. We can do that, of course, today using our virtual platforms that we have to have, roundtables or listening sessions with groups and communities across this Commonwealth. Also inviting those particular leaders across the state to give us feedback, be a part of our stakeholder group. And we'll be reaching out to a lot of community leaders, faith-based leaders, NAACP chapters, and other professional groups or affinity groups that represent communities of color and professionals in those fields. And we hope that you will be our stakeholder group, that we can tap into you when we're looking at legislation and we want to know how this legislation would impact our communities. So that's some of the ways in which we intend to do that, by having these listening sessions, by having stakeholder input on legislation, but also by setting an example in just our leadership here in the House. This year, this incoming class of legislators is the most diverse group we've had. There are about 30, a little bit more than 30 members of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus this year. Those are members who identify as Black, Latino, and Asian American. Those members also come, as I mentioned, from not just the cities of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. They come from the suburbs of those particular cities. They come from York County. They come from Berks County. And we look forward to reaching out to local elected officials in other areas, and we may not have representation right here in Harrisburg, but we know that there are elected officials of color throughout the Commonwealth and in those other cities and those other townships and municipalities, and we hope to engage them as well.
Okay. Well, as you know, today is Martin Luther King Day that we celebrate, and unfortunately, there's a large part of his dream we're still working towards. We see with the coronavirus, the disparities within healthcare. We also see with the coronavirus, the digital divide within our education system. As you know, we still have wage disparities and whatnot. What are some of the issues what are some of the legislative priorities of the Black Caucus as we move into a new session?
Right. You know, one of Martin Luther King's quotes that I always remember is that an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. And what we've seen with the coronavirus is that the disparities that exist in health and education, the disparities that exist when it comes to access to the internet, the digital divide, all of the other inequities that many of our communities already knew existed. We were already living those disparities. We were living those inequities. But those inequities were exacerbated. They were highlighted. Folks became more aware of those disparities during the pandemic. What I hope that we can do as we move forward this year, I know that a priority will be recovery, an economic recovery, a recovery where it comes to educating our children, recovery when it comes to rebuilding our health system. That when we implement this recovery, that we do it with a lens that is equitable, with a lens that is actually anti-racist. And I say that clearly. I am looking for anti-racist, equitable recovery strategy. And the reason why I say that is that if we use the same systems that were in place, the racist institutions that have been built on inequity to actually deliver a recovery response, then we will only perpetuate the same inequities. If we don't change how we deliver services, if we don't change how we support communities and support Pennsylvanians, if we decide to distribute resources, distribute the vaccines, distribute all of the other things that we, are looking to do to bring people back from this awful pandemic. If we use those same institutions, those same systems that created the inequities in the first place, then we will only further perpetuate and further divide or deepen the divide of those inequities that we've been talking about. So I hope that we look at new ways to deliver those resources and services here in Pennsylvania, that we make sure we're doing it through a lens of equity, and that we don't rely on the same racist institutions that we had in the past to do so. So that's first and foremost. I think that our communities are diverse in thought when it comes to Black and Brown communities. We are not monolithic, and so when we talk about a larger agenda, yes, I hope to be able to look at an agenda that uplifts all of our communities, and it will be focusing on things like education, environment, police reform and public safety, gun violence. But when you look at all of those issues, what I do know is that we are not one voice in that response. We are many voices, and I hope to include all of those voices It is not the Black vote. There are Black voters, and those voters have very, very different views on all of those issues. But I know we all want the same thing, and it's the same that all Pennsylvanians want, regardless of the color of their skin. We want to be able to have a safe, affordable home. We want to have education opportunities for our children that does not differ because of the zip code that they live in. We want to have access to quality and affordable health care. We want to make sure that our elders live out their lives in dignity and grace. And we want to make sure that we can provide for our family and put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. These are things that all Pennsylvanians want. And we want the same thing in Black and brown communities as well. So I hope we continue to focus on those issues. I know there are some that are going to rise up, particularly as we continue to deal with the pandemic, particularly as we address the issues around police reform and Black lives in this Commonwealth. And so those issues will definitely be on the table. But I hope to do that with the points of view of all Pennsylvanians and all Black Pennsylvanians.
You brought up the vaccine. As you know, a lot of communities of color are a little suspect of it, especially since it came out so early because of, in the past, communities of color were for vaccines and things of that nature. Is there anything that you can do in your position to kind of calm the nerves of communities of color that this vaccine is okay to take and can actually help you more so than harm you?
Right. First, let's point out that communities of color have been disproportionately impacted by the virus, by the coronavirus, right? We have been disproportionately exposed and infected, disproportionately least likely to be tested, and disproportionately had suffered the most in response to our health. Those of us who have been able to recover, many in the Black and brown community have had serious health complications in regards to the coronavirus, and many have lost their lives. And so when I look at those numbers, when I look at the fact that many of my community are the frontline workers, we are the folks working in the hospitals, working in the grocery stores, and more than likely not having the access or the privilege to socially distance for one reason or another, not having the access or the privilege to work from home. The virus has impacted our community in ways that we cannot even imagine. The vaccine, the very few complications or side effects that you may have are small in comparison to the risk of losing your life and the risk of losing someone in your loved ones. The vaccine, I hope that those who consider taking the vaccine do so, and that our community is not left out of that resource. Yes, it was created in a short time, but vaccines normally are created in this way. And I trust the vaccine. I know that one of the scientists working at Moderna is in fact a Black woman. And I think that gave me some comfort. I know many Black doctors in Philadelphia and in other parts of the Commonwealth who have been working to make sure our communities are tested, are doing the same to make sure that our communities have a trusted person on the other side of that vaccine. I think that message needs to come from trusted people from our communities. And for me, it is our Black medical professionals that I know have been doing that work. And I trust that they have done the work that is necessary to protect our community. And I, for one, when I am able to, and I am called back, will take that vaccine to protect myself and my family.
As you know, a second stimulus package was passed by the federal government. The first time around, a lot of minority-owned business weren't able to receive the low-interest loans and grants to keep their businesses afloat. Is there anything in your position you can do to ensure that doesn't happen this time around?
Right. This again goes back to what I said earlier. We cannot have a recovery that is built in the same systems that keeps our communities out. That first stimulus package, guidelines went through the Small Business Administration, which is federal, and the Small Business Administration decided to use our banking system to distribute these loans. That banking system historically has been built through racist, institutions and discrimination. And we know that our community has been on the receiving end of discriminatory practices from the financial system in this country. So we need to work around that. In the state, we have been able to do that by creating separate small business grant and loan opportunities through our Department of Community and Economic Development, and working with our local community development financial institutions, what we call CDFIs. Those CDFIs are right in our communities. Many of them are led by Black leaders in our communities. They focus on small businesses in those communities. And when we drafted the state legislation, we specifically said that is about 50% of those loans had to go, or grants had to go to what we call historically disadvantaged businesses, which were what we collectively minority businesses, Black, Hispanic, Asian American, and Pacific Islander, and other indigenous groups. That grant program was successful because we were intentional about making sure it went to those particular businesses of color. Now, if we decided how we work with the federal funds, we may not have as much control. That legislation and the rules around that will be decided by Congress. But we, however, funneled through us, any funds that we have control of here in the House, I hope to model that we had worked on in the states over the summer. In fact, Governor Wolf had just requested a transfer of funds from one pocket to further support small businesses, and the Black Caucus sent him a letter encouraging that those funds follow the same formula as the funds we distributed this summer, in which I know more than 50% went to minority-owned businesses.
Is there a working relationship with the Congressional Black Caucus to collectively work on some of the issues we're talking about today?
Yes, I think that it is one that has existed in the past, but one that I look forward to even more strongly working on and building. We have one member here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Congressman Dwight Evans, who is a former member of the Pennsylvania House, who is a mentor of mine, who has been supportive of the work that we're doing here at the state, has participated already in some of our Black Caucus events here. And we have already started those conversations of how we can continue to work together and look at the work that the Congressional Black Caucus is doing, and making sure that we are working in tandem. I know that we have worked with Congresswoman Watson Coleman in New Jersey around our Women and Girls of Color subcommittee, which she also works on at the congressional level. And so, yes, that work has always been somewhat connected and paralleled, and in fact, the history of both the Congressional Caucus and the State Black Caucus is very much connected and happened around the same time within years of each other.
How do you personally feel about the term defunding the police and the term versus what it actually means?
Right. I think folks who are thrown back by a term, let's be clear what defunding the police is about. I heard or read a quote from a local reporter in Philadelphia, Ernest Owens, who talked about, if you're offended by the term defunding the police, and I paraphrase here, how did you feel when they defunded our schools, when they defunded, our health centers, our libraries, our recreation programs, our after-school programs? Think about that, and before you react to the term defund the police, because year after year, those programs, our schools, all of those resources that our community rely on have in fact been defunded in one way or another. Resources taken away from them when we say defunded. Resources reallocated, and many times to law enforcement. Resources taken from schools, resources taken from housing programs and programs for our elderly, taken from those line items, taken from environmental protection services, and put into law enforcement, put into correction systems, put into the criminal justice system. So let's think about that. And as we, I leave that sort of thought with folks as we work through what our community meant when they cried out for action, and that action may have been a phrase or a slogan that didn't quite catch on for many people. But the true meaning behind defund the police is about allocating or reallocating resources to those needs and wants that citizens are asking for. We have for many, many years funded and overfunded and continue to fund law enforcement and police throughout our states. Whenever they ask, we made sure that our police officers had the resources they need to protect our communities and to be safe on the job. And I don't take away from that notion that we want to make sure that they can do their job effectively. But when you are not doing your job effectively, and we have seen that in recent events, how can we keep those public service officials and employees, those law enforcement workers safe, and able to do their job effectively, while also providing the resources in our community that are much, much needed. And I would tell you that right now there is no balance in that. The scales are way tipped in funding and financing law enforcement as opposed to funding and financing education and health and housing and many other issues that I know that are important to Pennsylvanians.
One last topic I would like to talk to you about is we see a lot more Black women and actually other women of color running for office and actually winning. And it's very exciting to see. As a woman of color yourself, can you talk about some of the unique obstacles that we have to go through running for offices and actually succeeding, especially since we don't always have the powers that be behind us, helping us with those resources?
Right. When I first got elected to the General Assembly here in Harrisburg, 253 legislators between the Senate and the House. At the time, there were only 9 Black women. And I also throw this line out there because it helps me visualize what I was dealing with. 9 Black women, 253 legislators, and 13 white guys named Mike. There were. And that had been the case for 5 years. There had been 9 Black women and 13 white guys named Mike. This year we have 10 Black women. We have 1 other woman of color. I have not counted the white guys named Mike, but I know that there are still many other white guys here in the Capitol that I work with. And what are the challenges? What does that mean? First and foremost, even deciding to run is a challenge because we don't often have the establishment behind us. I know that we have 1 Black Black woman that's in Superior Court here, Judge Carolyn Nichols. And when she first ran for that statewide race, a lot of folks did not get behind her. I know she is considering another statewide race this year, and there's a big question for her about how can she get support so that she can continue to progress in her career on the bench and to serve us in that way. And she was successful. People thought she would not win that race, and she was successful doing it even without the establishment. So we deal with that. We deal with not having the establishment behind us, the finances, the resources to do it. But what Black women have always done, we have always been behind every single movement that made something happen in this country, whether it was labor, whether it was women's rights, the civil rights, and even today with Black Lives Matter, you see Black women in behind and up front making sure that our voices are heard. And in doing that, it is time for Black women to move from behind those movements to the front of those movements and for our leadership to be appreciated. Now, I know Black women are trending now on Twitter and Facebook, and we're doing these amazing things here in the House. We have our first Black woman to take lead of a caucus, and my sister, Representative Joanna McClinton. As I mentioned, we have 10 Black women in office right now in the General Assembly, and I know that we are going to do great things. I'm chairing here the Black Caucus. We have Black women taking on chairmanships and other opportunities throughout, and other leadership opportunities throughout the General Assembly, and I look forward to us doing more. But as we mentioned, the challenge remains. Our work is always appreciated because we've seen it. We've seen our sister down in Georgia, Stacey Abrams, get a lot of praise in recent days, and I'm glad that that we're sending her flowers now. But we also know that there are Black women across this country that are doing similar work and not getting recognized for that work. There are Black women who would like to run for office but are not tapped. We have an open Senate seat here, or will have an open Senate seat, as Senator Toomey announced his intent to not run again. And there are very few, if any, Black women names that I've heard in the statewide conversation to be considered here in Pennsylvania. And the names that are thrown up will suggest there's no way that a Black woman could win across this state. There's no way a Black woman can get the support across the state as we've seen in other states. But I challenge us on that. And we as a community need to figure out how we can get Black women and men across the state elected, and also how do we continue to build Black women up from those who decide to run for school boards or county commissioners, or run for judge and sit on the bench, or run for as a legislator in a city council or in the state house. We need to support them in doing so.
Can you suggest any organizations or resources that Black women can go to help them start the beginnings of a campaign outside of the party structure?
Sure. In Philadelphia, and I believe they're reaching across the state, is an organization called She Can Win, and that is ran by my friend Jasmine Sessoms and a powerful group of Black women from the Southeast area, and that is focused specifically on Black women interested in running for office. And then there are organizations that support women in general. Emerge Pennsylvania, which is working and training women to run for office, and then Represent PA, which fundraises and supports financially women running for office. And so I would suggest sort of all three, starting with She Can Win, and then going, or maybe She Can Win now, but She Can Win, and then moving on to Emerge, and then as you prepare your run, have a conversation with Represent PA about how to fundraise and how they can support you financially as well.
Well, great. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, thank you so much for having me on today. As we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy, let's not forget how young he was as he led our country and led the civil rights movement. And as we look at not just Black women as leaders, but we look at some of our young people who are ready and poised to take on leadership across this Commonwealth.
Great. Well, thank you, and good luck in your new role.
Thank you.